everybody, welcome back to Melanie Loves Death Metal, and I am finally uploading an album ranking video. So we'll do it pretty much similar to what every other YouTuber does that you probably have already watched. You probably already watched their album rankings for this particular artist already, and I'm just ripping everybody off. But I do enjoy these types of videos. I do look them up quite frequently on YouTube, and this is something that I often do with a lot of bands and a lot of albums. I'm a junkie for this stuff. So I did an album ranking. I did 2 album ranking streams on Marty Worm's channel with Alan for Heavy Metallurgy. A while back we did King Diamond, and then we did Merciful Fate right after that. It was a lot of fun. The way that they did that format is not going to be the same for this particular video. Everybody else that I've seen on here, and don't get me wrong, I like that format. I do like that format. However, I'm going to go right down the discography from the first album to the latest album rather than just doing a top 10 list for this time around. And we're going to use the trusty old tier maker that everybody uses. So, and I'll talk through, my favorite albums and ones that I just don't particularly love. But Autopsy is by far one of the most iconic death metal bands ever. If you're watching this and you have no idea who they are, you might as well just stop this video and go listen to them, so then that way you're not completely lost for this. So I'm assuming if you don't know who Autopsy is, you're probably new to the genre. So iconic bands, band that came out early 90s, I think 89 was the first year that they released their first album. They're from the US, just all around fucking incredible death metal bands. I will say one thing about this band is they have solid albums as a whole. I think their whole discography is pretty fantastic, but there are some albums that I prefer over the others, and there are some albums that I don't listen to. I just don't ever put it off the shelf. I don't ever put it on my AirPods when I'm walking my dogs at night. But before I made this video, I did go back. I did go listen to all the albums again. It took several weeks to do, just to get more familiar with albums that I hadn't heard in a really long time. So with that said, let me get the trusty old tier maker up. Sorry about that. If you're not familiar, a tier maker is a popular thing that a lot of YouTubers do. Yeah, I mean, somebody already made the Autopsy album rank list for me, so that made this a lot easier. I didn't have to go in and do it myself. So S is the best, obviously. D is the worst. I was always a C and D student in school, so I don't have any issues with this, but S is the best, just in case you were not familiar. So let's go ahead and get started. We will start with, obviously, the first release that came out back in 89. This is iconic. Oh, I just realized that this is the wrong order, so let's just fix that. Okay, is Severed Survival. So you're probably thinking, what is that album cover? Because you're probably used to seeing Severed Survival look like this. And I just lost my camera angle. Can you please? There you go. You're probably used to seeing Severed Survival look like this. They did like a 20th anniversary or something like that, I don't remember, where they made an alternate cover of this. And I will admit, I do prefer this cover out of the two, but this is the original one, but I do love this one. So I ended up getting the CD that had both. This is out on Peaceful. I don't remember what pressing this is. I've had it for a few years now. So yeah, Severed Survival, first full length. And just a note, I'm not doing demos or comps or EPs or anything like that. I'm just doing their studio albums. So Severed Survival. Couple of things about this album that make it not perfect if you're a production nerd. So the production on this is relatively, it's not the best, I will say. The bass lines are very, very loud, and they are not mixed in that well. But I say that, and you're probably thinking, well, is that a bad thing? And for this particular album, it is not. So on this particular album, they have Steve DiGiorgio on this album, and I think, does he play a fretless bass on this? I'm just looking at my notes to see if that's what I called out. I can't remember. Somebody comments in the comments if that's the case. It's incredible. So yeah, the bass riffage is very loud. The mix is a little off. The vocal style is different. I would say sometimes it just sounds like he's doing like a caveman Exactly like that. And so when I first heard this album, I kind of was like, what the fuck is this? I can't do this. And I will admit that seems blasphemous now, because now that I'm older and I'm heavily into death metal, obviously it's my favorite metal genre, I love this album now. I think the bass line is fun. It's got a great groove to it. I find myself humming it all the time whenever I listen to this album. And as the years have gone on, my love for it has just gotten deeper. So to me, this is a perfect album in regards to a crucial death metal album that you should have in your collection. And I'm just popping this right up there as an S. Is it my favorite Autopsy album? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. You think you'll know by the end of this video. So next up is Mental Funeral, another iconic Autopsy album, and this is tough. If I had to choose between Severed Survival and Mental Funeral, it would have to be depending on the day that I'm feeling. To be honest with you, it's one of those situations here. Mental Funeral came out a couple years after this, in the early '90s. There you go, the iconic album cover. And apology, I'm looking at my notes and stuff, so that way I don't forget to say stuff. So second full length. The lineup changes a little bit on this album. I believe Steve DiGiorgio's out. Their bass player is now Steve Cutler, who I'm assuming is related to Eric Cutler, who's a vocalist, as you guys know, or does vocals on Slaughter Day on this. Eric Cutler is the guitarist. Blah, 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 blah. Chris Reifert is, yeah. So anyway, the lineup changes a little bit, and they start to progress quite a bit from Sever Survival. The production sounds fantastic. And I just, again, it's hard to pick between the first two albums. I will be honest with you. The artwork on this is phenomenal. This is a Peaceville reissue. It's not an original. So if you're looking for Autopsy albums and you want to get them in your collection, Peaceville did repress them. They're everywhere. Like, they're even on Amazon. Hell's Headbangers, all the major distros are up there. So Mental Funeral is a classic death metal album. It's got very doomy elements. I would say probably more of the doomy elements on this than there are on Severed Survival. And when I say that, I mean it's the slower chuggage, not like the doom that you might think of when you're listening to like Chemist, I guess. Well, maybe a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, it's got more of a doomy elements, and that's probably one of the things that I love about this album a lot. And I will admit, for the longest time, I said that this was my favorite album by Autopsy. That'd be the first thing that popped out of my mouth whenever somebody would ask me. And a lot of it was because, I wrote off Severed Survival just because of the sound production for a long time. It was a tough thing for me to swallow. I don't know. It just wasn't. Maybe I wasn't in the right mindset. I don't know. But eventually, as you guys know, that has changed. So I think Mental Funeral is another classic death metal album that you have to have in your collection if you're a death metal aficionado. If you want those early 90s death metal albums in your collection, this is definitely one of those that has to be in there. I believe it is one of the best second albums to ever be released by a band, and this is also an S tier for me. So these are pretty dead even for me in regards to nostalgia, in regards to the songs that I absolutely love. Slaughter Day is one of those songs that I absolutely love. And again, it's got a really nice groove to it that I thoroughly enjoy. Now, the third album is when things kind of drift off a little bit for me. Acts of the Unspeakable. This one right here. Still got the Peaceville Obi on there. This one comes out about 2 years later, 92. So as you can see, they're pumping out albums now at this point. They've released 3 within the last 3 to 4 years. This one I had never listened to for a very long time. I can't remember. The first time I heard this album was most within the last 10 years, I would say. And I was surprised at how different it sounded. It's got shorter songs on it. It's definitely got more of a grindcore feel to it. And they were definitely doing something different on this album. They also have a new bassist again. This guy's name is now Josh on this one. Eric Cutler's still there. Chris Reifert's still there. You know, still there. Um, so yeah, shorter songs, a lot long, like more songs on the album, but they're shorter. I think the longest song on this album is about 4 minutes, but everything else is around 2 minutes, 1 minute long. So a different take, faster sounding songs. The doomy elements are gone. It's more of a grindcore sounding album. And for me, when listening to Autopsy and after those first two albums, it's a bit of a change. So I get what they were trying to do. They probably wanted to try to do something a little bit, change it up, not have the same, slower death metal doomy sound. And I get it, and I appreciate bands that do that. I think for this particular situation, it ended up being not my most favorite album. It's one that I don't listen to hardly ever, and I'm putting this down at a C. I did re-listen to it a couple times in the last few weeks, and again, it still just hasn't clicked with me that much. And I really do enjoy grindcore music, and I've been buying a lot of it lately, and it's been I've been in the mood for it, so I definitely appreciate it more now. But it's still not, in terms of this discography, not one that I will pull off a shelf more frequently. So the next one is probably the one that I have the most shit to talk about. Pun intended. The next for a fourth studio album that comes out in 2003, sorry, 1995. So we're still in the 90s here. They did like a reissue in 2003, which is the one that I have. Easily my least favorite album of all time from every band. And you're probably thinking, what the fuck, Melanie? Like, really? Of everything that you've ever listened to? And there's several reasons around it. This album cover will start off right now. I'm not one to really just shit on an album cover or really judge a band by an album cover, because album covers are just awful. Okay, let's just put it out there. There's bands that make awful album covers, and I can name a lot of them. Especially a lot of the like industrial style bands. Their album covers are just boring as hell. Like, and they just don't make sense. And Cannibal Corpse has those really gory, awful album covers. Like Tomb of the Mutilated is just such a disgusting album cover. And there's all those brutal death metal bands and stuff like that. But for this one, I don't get offended by those, by the way, and I don't really get offended by much of anything, but this one, for whatever reason, really fucking grossed me out. I mean, this person's got a piece of shit in their mouth, like a literal piece of shit in their mouth, and I look at it, and I'm like, I don't want to listen to this. I don't even want to look at this. Like, what the fuck is this? And that was my initial reaction when I first saw this album, and it took me a really long time to buy this album for that reason, and even listen to it. It just really turned me off. Really, still to this day, it's disgusting. Like, I pulled it off my shelf and was like, why the fuck do I own this? And I have a lot of disgusting album covers, but this one just really grosses me out the most. It's awful. So now we'll get to the things that actually matter about an album. It's the sound and the music. Again, we're on grindcore release part 2 of the Autopsy era, and again, shorter songs, more songs on the album. I think the longest song on this album is now, like, what, we're going on like 5 minutes now. But after that, it's 1 minute. And I don't have an issue with song length at all. Like, trust me, I'm a doom metal fan. I'm a prog metal fan as well, and those things don't bother me. But again, it's just, it's different. It's different from the first two albums that I absolutely love. As you know, absolutely love. And my computer is making noise, so we're just gonna pause these notifications. There we go. Yeah, it just, it's the grindcore album part 2, and I don't, none of these songs click. I listened to it again, and I just, I really don't enjoy this album. I don't at all. I think it's just it could be an underrated album. Maybe I'm being too critical on it, and maybe just the album cover really ruined it for me that much. But this is going there. No apologies. However, it is saved. The discography is saved after this. Their next release, they redeem themselves. They really, they come back for me. And their next release, Macabre Eternal, comes quite a bit apart. There's a little bit of a breakup there after this album. I don't really know the whole details around it. I'm not going to admit to know the whole Autopsy background and history or anything like that. But Macabre Eternal comes 2011, so there's quite a bit of a time that comes in between these albums, and they're back now, and they released this album, and to me they're back into better form, the form that as they know as Autopsy. I'm looking right now for the people on this album. You know, they've got the core there, they've got Chris, Danny, Eric, and then now they've got another new bassist, which is named Joe. Macabre Eternal is a fantastic album. I really enjoy this album. This is one that I listen to quite frequently, and I really love this album cover. This is one of my favorite album covers. I can't even lie. And if you're not familiar with this album, you should definitely pull it off the shelf and you should listen to it, because the 2000 era Autopsy is some great stuff. Again, I really love that album cover. I love the color of it. I just love the drawing. And it's a great album. Some of my favorite songs on here are ones that I still play quite frequently. I mean, just Hand of Darkness starting off right away, Dirty Gore Whore. Like the first like 3 to 4 songs on this album are so great. Like they just really draw me into the album. I absolutely love it. I can listen to it beginning to end, no issues. This one is going up in the A tier. Now, this is where things probably get a little bit different for me as an Autopsy fan. I've watched a lot of other rankings, I've read a lot of other rankings, and some people probably might disagree with me on some of this stuff now. So the next 2 albums are probably the ones that I don't have strong feelings on, but I definitely appreciate one more than the other. Headless Ritual comes after Macabre Eternal, and this one came out 2 years later, and this one for me was the one that I wasn't, at the time of this coming out, I wasn't up on latest death metal albums. I wasn't really actively buying things or collecting at the time. So this one was a sleeper on my part. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I didn't really pay much attention to the promotion of it. I didn't listen to it. So this is one of those albums that took me a long time to finally sit down and listen to. It was one that I just didn't really ever get into for that reason. But now that I've listened to it, I think it's a good album. And I think they're doing something here that is consistent now as the Autopsy sound. They're not going back to the stuff that they did with Shitfun and the other one, I can't think of it right now. But I think it's a good album. You know, they've got the same lineup from Macabre Eternal for this one. It looks like, did they change up something for this? What did my notes say? No. So anyway, I think it's a really good album. And I think in regards to it being their 6th studio album and them being around from the early 90s and having 2 iconic bands, it's consistency at key, and I believe a B ranking is by far fair. It's not my favorite album. It's not the most awesome album. And maybe I need to listen to it a little bit more. Maybe it needs to grow on me a little bit more. But I think a B ranking is okay. A lot of people rank it a little bit higher. Some people have said it's at least their number 3 or whatever. Macabre Eternal just is one of those ones that I can't put it above that. I really can't. And now we are finally to the latest release, Tourniquets, Hacksaws, and Graves. This came out in 2014. God, it's been a while since they've released an album. And I didn't realize it had been that long since their last album. I feel like, have they announced or have they said anything? Because I know they're still doing tours and... Yeah, it says they're currently working on a new album that's supposed to be released this year. Alright, cool. Anyway, my notes are very crappy, so sorry. I like... Just as I was listening to albums, I was writing up notes like, say this, make sure to call out this, and I'm doing a bad job of reading them, and should have probably prepped this a little bit better. But anyway, Tourniquets, Hacksaws, and Graves. This album, to me, is pretty fucking good. And some people don't really enjoy it as much. They probably think it's a little bit more more overproduced. It's got more of that cleaner production on there. And I think that that just as a whole is what happens when you come from the 90s into the late 2000s. There's more technology involved. There's more digitization. There's more of that, the pedals, all that shit that comes into your your guitars, the amps, the heads, all that stuff changes. So yeah, it is very produced. Same with this one. These two sounds you start to hear them more a cleaner sound, but that doesn't really bother me. And again, another one of my all-time favorite album covers. I fucking love this album cover. I just think it's phenomenal. This album, I fell in love with this album, and for whatever reason, I don't know why, I must have, shortly after Headless Ritual came out, I must have started really getting back into the death metal shit again. I think this is around the time I started really heavily getting into cattle decapitation. They were really starting to hit me there, and I just was really like, this album came out, I bought it the day it was released, I remember, and it's one that I still listen to very frequently. The first two albums, Macabre Eternal and this one, are the four albums that I listen to a lot. Like, this is the one that I put on and I'm fucking ready. Like, let's go. I'm listening to this from beginning to end. I'm gonna sing it. I'm gonna talk about it with people as I'm listening to it, and that's literally what I did last week. You probably noticed if you follow me on Instagram, I posted a couple stories because I was doing that. I was pinging people, being like, "Oh man, have you ever heard this song with Autopsy? It is so damn good. This album is so good. People need to talk about this album more. I think it's so underrated." But yeah, I think Forever Hungry is probably one of my all-time favorite death metal songs. Like, no bullshit. I love the riffage in that song. I just love it. I think it's awesome. Even like the All Shall Bleed instrumental. Like, come on, it's only a minute long. I'm just like, yes, this song. Like, I don't know. I really love this album. I have just, there's something about it. There's something about it. And maybe just the time of me having it and listening to it and buying it, I just probably really needed that in my life or something. So this is going up A tier, and it's probably going to go ahead of Macabre Eternal. So there you go. That is my ranking. So I would definitely say Severed Survival is probably my favorite Autopsy album. A close second is Mental Funeral. And then the latest album, Hacksaws, Tourniquets, and Graves, and Macabre Eternal. So these four right here are my favorite Autopsy albums. These are the ones I listen to all the time still. I still talk about them frequently, like I said. And these last couple weeks, re-listening to these albums again just really put me into the death metal, 90s death metal. Like, I want to do more of these videos. I'm going to start digging out these discographies. I'm going to start buying them that I don't have. These three, Headless Ritual, you know, again, I feel like it probably, some people might disagree with me on this. It's totally okay. Everybody's, you know, they've got different opinions. It's all subjective. And these two, I'll keep trying. Shitfun, maybe not. If they ever do like a reissue and change the album cover, they won't. But still, they're a great group of guys. I mean, well, I don't know them personally, but they're fun. I've seen them live. I saw them live in Chicago. There's a recording out there. I need to get that CD because that album was amazing. I have, you know, their demos. I have another EP comp. I've got a couple other things that are coming that I realized I didn't have. But again, Autopsy is one of my all-time favorite bands in terms of death metal bands. Iconic, and I'm glad that this was one of the discographies that I finally ranked. So that is all that I had for you guys today. Let me pop this back over here, and there we go. That's all I had for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed my ranking discographies video in the Autopsy collection. Again, fucking iconic bands, and even though I don't really care for two albums on this discography, they still, as a whole, have a very great discography, and a lot of people would agree, I think, in that regard. So be on the lookout. I'm also recording other ranking discographies. I'm going to start trying to upload more of these. I'll probably do some more obscure bands too that you're probably not too familiar with, some more underground-ish bands, and talk about that as well. But for now, I'll get the big names out of the way. So thank you guys, and again, thank you for all the support, and I will see you in the next one.